Welcome back into another edition of the Arrowhead Pride Report. It is Friday, September 15th, 2 days away from the Kansas City Chiefs taking on the Jacksonville Jaguars in week 2 of the NFL season, trying to see if they can avoid an 0-2 start against another serious AFC contender. Joined as always by the leader and chief of Arrowhead Pride, Pete Sweeney. Sween, it's Friday. We had a pretty good Thursday night football game. I hope you won some money, and I hope it was beneficial for you in the way that it was beneficial for me last night.
Yeah, you are just beaming right now. If you're serving up me to tell the people what happened, Steve cashed on a single game parlay for what was it, north of $275 or something like that. So it's a nice Friday
About
for you, I
300.
guess.
Yeah, it's
About
a
300.
nice
There
little
you
Thursday
go.
bonus for me.
If you're watching us and we're doing this on Friday Live, so you guys can tweet and Facebook and send us questions. You can see that I'm like one of those bungee jumpers at Arrowhead Stadium. There's something going on my camera today where I'm floating, and so I always wanted to have that thrill, and this is I think as close as I'm ever gonna get because Steve, as you know, I'm deathly afraid of heights, so I would never really do that, but it kind of looks like it if you're watching the live stream. Did you lose me, Steve?
No, I was getting a scam call, and it made my computer freeze for a second. I don't know what's going on with that. I've been getting a lot of those this week. I don't know what's
Anything can happen on the live Arrowhead Pride report here, as you can see.
No, but you look great this morning, Pete.
Thank you.
Camera issues aside,
Right.
I think you look fine. That the hair is flowing today. It is ready for week 2. It's
Yeah.
like it's as if
Yeah.
you were headed to Jacksonville yourself this
Sure.
morning.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. No, thank you. It feels like it's a good hair day, so I'm happy about that too.
So we've talked about this game a ton this week. Obviously, this is a huge week 2 matchup for the Kansas City Chiefs. And, the injury report is not long this week for the Kansas City Chiefs. And that's what you want to see. Travis Kelce has been limited all week. L'Jarius Sneed has been limited all week, and Chris Jones has been limited all week, but that's kind of part of his ramp up period after reporting to the team and ending his holdout. So, as of right now, ahead of Friday's practice and the final injury report ahead of Sunday's game, I'm feeling pretty confident that everybody on the Chiefs roster is going to be up in week 2 against this ascending Jacksonville team.
Yeah, I tend to think as I'm looking at the status reports from this week, I've been mentioning that I tend to think that like L'Jarius Sneed might get this limited treatment the entire year. I've said that I don't think I'm overly concerned about that. I do still feel like Travis Kelce is up in the air. So if I'm doing my early prediction, and I mean, who really needs it? We're going to see by mid-afternoon anyway. But I would tend to think Chris Jones will have no status, meaning he'll play for sure in some capacity. And I still think Travis Kelce is going to get hit with the questionable tag. I think they're just making sure they're crossing their T's, they're dotting their I's just to make sure that the risk of re-injury is not there for Kelce. Even after the loss last week, there's no reason to put Travis Kelce out there because you need him for the 15 games. You're certainly going to need him for the playoffs. And we know the Chiefs' goals every year is not to just win the division and make the playoffs. It's to win the Super Bowl. And so they're going to be careful with Travis even after the loss. And I just tend to think, again, that he will be questionable. But we'll see. We'll see. We'll keep you updated at Arrowhead Pride this afternoon.
And I think obviously getting Chris Jones back is going to be a huge boost to the defense that looked pretty good in week 1, but you still need your game wrecker. You still need the superstar that this thing is all built around. So we'll see how many reps he gets on Sunday. After agreeing to his 1-year contract that is loaded with incentives, and the way for him to make all of his money back and maybe get a little bit extra on top after this offseason holdout and all these fines is for him to play and play really well. So we'll see where he's at on Sunday. But I tend to think that, the Chiefs might try to ramp him back up slow. Like maybe he only plays like 50% of the snaps or something like that. But I have to imagine that Chris Jones wants to get on the field and make an impact so he could try to start carving a dent into some of these incentives he's looking to make this season.
Yeah, when coaches are talking about players returning from injury or situations like this, they tend to always say the same thing, like we got to hold the player back from himself. But I know that Chris Jones probably didn't actually enjoy being away for the team for this long. I'm sure there was a part of him that was happy that he didn't have to go through training camp, because training camp, as we know, especially with Andy Reid, can be extremely brutal. But he's itching to play based upon everything that we're hearing. We get a 20-25 minute look out at practice on Wednesday and Thursday, and you could tell that he's enthusiastic. Travis Kelce, I know that Aaron posted that video of Chris Jones and Travis Kelce kind of embracing, jumping into each other. I mean, I think the entire group has a better feel to it with the band back together. And if you go back to my twitter.com/PG Sween, Ron Kopp, our lead analyst, helped me make this tweet yesterday. And Steve Spagnuolo was describing the difference of having Chris Jones and not having Chris Jones. And I thought it was really interesting. He brought up a Mike Dana sack. And if you look at the Dana sack from the last game against the Detroit Lions, what Spagnuolo was describing is like the only way that this could have happened is if everybody did their job. On this particular play, Trent McDuffie looked to be following Amon St. Brown in man, but they also had a double call where Mike Edwards was on the other side to make sure that they locked him up. Jared Goff sees that, a little bit of a delay. Mike Dana is able to do what he does inside and get the sack. And so what Steve is saying is when you have Chris Jones, sometimes you don't need all 11, because Chris Jones is almost worth 2 or 3 players. And so it really changes the game when it comes to the Chiefs defense. And if you're looking for a bright spot the other night, I thought they played pretty damn well without Chris Jones. So now you inject him into the lineup, and I feel like the Chiefs got to be feeling pretty good on that side of the ball. And like I said, I think Kelce's going to be questionable, but if he plays, the vibes will be right in Duval County, and that shouldn't spell good things for those Jaguars. I don't think both of these players, if they do play, will receive the usual number of snap counts, but Steve Spagnuolo would not put a number on Chris Jones specifically.
And I want to remind you guys, if you got any questions about Chiefs Jags, just jump into the comment section. We'll get to those here before we wrap. And I want to stick with the defensive side of the ball, because we've been previewing all week long this Jaguars offense, which they were good against Indianapolis. I don't think they were like so impressive that I'm like scared of this Jacksonville team just yet and what they could potentially be later on in the season. But that's also like a divisional game, and those matchups are always weird. So, and it's week 1, so you don't want to take too much away from that performance. But the Chiefs are going to have their hands full. And in week 1, yeah, the defense was good, but you were talking about Spags and the way he had to kind of adjust on having Chris Jones. Like, he was dialing up a lot of blitzes and trying to manufacture pressure. And I don't think you can do that against Jacksonville. Not the way that Calvin Ridley looked in week 1. And Christian Kirk, we know, burned the Chiefs pretty well last season when they played. Travis Etienne was more involved in week 1 in the Jags passing game than he was at any point during all of last season. And that's a scary thing, because he's a really talented, explosive playmaker. And then Evan Ingram and Zay Jones, like, this is a very, very talented Jacksonville offense led by their superstar quarterback, Trevor Lawrence. And they're going to have to get some pressure on this offensive line. And now the Jags injury report is pretty short this week too, but the biggest names you need to know are Brandon Scherf and Luke Fortner, 2 starting offensive linemen for them. Both did not practice earlier in the week. They were limited on Thursday, so we'll monitor their status on Friday and ahead of the game, because if for some reason both those guys can't go, that's a huge matchup advantage for the Chiefs, and hopefully Chris Jones getting back on the field.
Yeah, Chris Jones is well rested. I mean, that's one of the positives about this holdout that lasted through week 1. And you look on the other side of it, and the Jaguars are looking like they're going to have to play backups at those offensive line positions. It tends to look like Scherf is the one that is less likely to play. Fortner, it seems like there is some optimism that he could go. But so the key part of that is like looking at that right side of the Jags offensive line. I think the Chiefs really feel like they can take advantage of that. This is an interesting matchup, Steve. You mentioned that the Jags, I thought themselves against the Colts, they seem to be in a way knocking off the rust just like everybody else, but also in that effort, they were able to score 31 points. So I don't think this is just going to be a thing where the Chiefs are going to go down and just be able to bully them when it comes to the offensive side of the football. I think the Chiefs defense is going to give up some points, and we'll see if the Chiefs can end up having more points themselves by the end of the game. I also want to make the point too, like, this is in a way a weird pseudo division game because this is the third time in 11 months that the Chiefs are playing the Jaguars. They saw them last year, they saw them in the playoffs, and now they get them early on in the season. And so we always talk about that football cliche, and it's something that a lot of people say that it's really tough to beat a team 3 times in 1 year. This is falling into that category, although it's kind of an atypical situation. It's usually against a division team in the playoffs. And so talked to Steve Spagnuolo about that. That was one of my questions yesterday, and he believes that there are going to be certain looks on tape, and this will be on both sides, where you believe the Jags are doing something from the 2 games that maybe you played them in, and they're pivoting completely different. But the coaching staff is well aware of this. It seems like Spagnuolo is coaching them up in that fashion. It's just like there's going to be some disguising here on both sides of the ball of, we saw this twice, both last year and in the playoffs, and they could be doing something completely different. So I think that factors into it as well and makes this more intriguing. I also think, like, last point on Jags Chiefs, I think Chiefs and Bills and Chiefs and Bengals gets a lot of the rivalry respect. I think the Jags are a pretty good up and coming team. And if you guys follow my picks, I'd make the picks before the year. I have the Jags based on division and their schedule, and the Chiefs and their division beating each other up. I have the Jags doing that like 2021 bye week that like the Titans got. The Titans were fortunate with their schedule and they just kind of backdoored their way into the top seed. But I think the Jags, in what they have in front of them this year, could end up being that top seed in the AFC. So this is a legitimate team, and I just don't think it's getting the respect right now of Chiefs Bengals. But I think when we look at maybe this matchup a year or 2 from now, it might be one of those teams that you see the Chiefs battling with year in and year out to win the conference and move on to the Super Bowl.
Yeah, I think the Jags are for real. I think Dougie P is a really good head coach. I think
the
Trevor
Silver Fox.
Lawrence
call him Silver Fox with that hair and the visor.
Yeah.
Speaking of good flow, I mean, you got to really respect what Doug Peterson does with his hair.
I think they're legitimate contenders and a really, really talented, young, ascending, and exciting football team. You mentioned kind of the revenge factor, and we talked about that on Show MBK this week, and that's available for you guys this morning on the Arrowhead Pride Podcast Network, so make sure you go check it out. We got over an hour of great stuff for you ahead of this game. But we kind of talked about that revenge game factor, and I also talked to Jags beat reporter John Shipley yesterday and asked him about that. And, the Chiefs ended the Jags season last year. They also beat them in the regular season. And so there probably is some revenge factor kind of stuff to this, where I have to assume that Jacksonville, we talk about teams circling games, like the Chiefs are an opponent that everybody kind of circles and says, like, we can make a statement by beating that team because of who the Chiefs are at this point. But I think there's also some revenge factor here that we're not talking about with Patrick Mahomes. Like, you remember back to that playoff game where he gets hurt and has to exit the game, and Chad Henne comes in and just like how devastated he was that he had to go out of that game for even a snap. And they still wind up winning that game in large part to Isaiah Pacheco and a Chad Henne-led scoring drive. But it was still a close contest. And I think these are 2 pretty evenly matched teams for the most part. But I think that Patrick Mahomes, there's a little bit of revenge factor here with him that we're not talking about because of the injury last season, and because prior to that, he looked like he was going to go absolutely insane in that playoff game. And then also the Chiefs' just overall poor performance in week 1. I think back to when he was speaking to the media after their loss to the Lions, and he was like, yeah, I'm always embarrassed when we lose. But he seemed particularly upset about losing week 1, kicking off the NFL season. And so at some point, if we get a larger sample size of like Patrick Mahomes just not making these things work, then we can start to have the discussions about the wide receivers, and like maybe it's just not going to work this season. Maybe this group just isn't what we thought it was going to be. But he has done it every time. Every time we've doubted him, Patrick Mahomes is like, okay, I'll just go throw for 350 and 4 touchdowns. And I kind of feel like that's the kind of performance that we're going to get out of him this week based on just his down performance in week 1.
Yeah, I don't know if it's revenge necessarily against the Jaguars because they were able to get those wins, but it is almost revenge against like himself in week 1. I don't think Patrick Mahomes felt like he played the best possible game he could have in week 1. Certainly wasn't helped by the Chiefs dropping the football. I actually looked this up for AP Premier. We have a Premier newsletter option now at arrowheadpride.com. If you're interested, there's more information at the top of the site. We also have it in the bottom too, if you want looking for just more information about what you get out of the newsletter. But I wanted to quantify in a way what is scorched earth that you hear a lot of, like Patrick Mahomes look like when he plays angry in a way coming from a loss. And so I looked up all the games after a loss that the Chiefs have suffered in the regular season with Patrick Mahomes. He's 13-3, Steve. 372 of 571. So that's a 65% completion percentage, 4,467 yards. It's about 280 per game, a 42-15 touchdown to interception ratio. And again, that's over 16 games. And so that's a pretty damn good season, if you will, if you count all the games of Mahomes after a loss. And I always think he comes into these games after a loss ultra motivated. He's not undefeated, so I thought that was a small interesting point, but the numbers are usually pretty good, and I tend to think we get a ticked off Pat that's pretty accurate on Sunday. And you talk about the wide receiver room. I think they have something to prove as well. So we'll see how the wide receivers respond to what was a poor effort in week one.
Again, you guys can jump into the comments if you have any questions. We're only going to be around for a few more minutes here, but as far as the offensive game plan goes against this Jaguars defense, and they've got a nice pass rush. Like Josh Allen is a legitimate pass rush player who is an impact player for their defensive line. And Trayvon Walker looked like he's improved in week one. Yeah. We'll still have to see the larger sample size of development from the former number 1 overall pick, because he did not have a great rookie season. But they can give you some problems. But I'm still very confident in the Chiefs' offensive line. I thought they were really good in week one, despite Aiden Hutchinson getting moved around and giving them some matchup problems. Overall, they played really well, and having Travis Kelce back this week is obviously going to open up the offensive game plan. But just after practice, after seeing how this team is going to react after a week one loss, do you feel confident in trying to predict one of these wide receivers stepping up and making an impact on Sunday? Or are you still kind of like, they're going to play 6-7 guys and I have no idea who's going to have the big game?
Yeah, well, I did my 6-10 thing with Carrington that I do on Wednesdays, and he was kind of asking, well, which wide receiver do you trust? And man, I look foolish when I say this, but I think it's Sky Moore. I really do. I feel like he looked really, really good during the month of training camp, and I know that it's just training camp, and he looked not so great last week. But I think he's taken accountability. I think he's looking forward. One of the things that stuck out about the press conference yesterday is he essentially said, I probably should have caught that ball on that long drive to extend the game, and it would have made all the difference in the world. I think he knows that. I think the wide receiver room as a whole is embarrassed. I think that the Chiefs are going to stick with Sky and, of course, Kadarius in the way that they did last week. They don't just go away from a guy for a bad game or anything like that. However, I trust Sky. I think he'll get the snaps again to make an impact. I would personally like to see more snaps from Rashee Rice. I think he came in with I believe it was 20 last game. And to me, in those 20, he showed in a way that he belonged. I know that it's not common for rookies to get this nod where they get more opportunities because they are a first-year player. And an interesting point was Andy Reid had been asked this week about Deshaun Jackson. That was the last player, that rookie player, wide receiver, that led the room for Andy Reid in receiving yards as a rookie. That goes all the way back to 2008. So that's how uncommon it is. But I think the tape for Rice is a little bit undeniable here, and we'll see if he gets more snaps in 20. I tend to think you gotta give him a little bit more and see what happens. And so really interested in number 4 this week. I think he is a player to watch, but I'm not giving up on Sky Moore. Preseason, I predicted Sky Moore to lead the Chiefs wide receivers in receiving yards. He had a nice big round goose egg, Steve, in week one, but I'm sticking to my guns. I think Moore is going to be that player for the Chiefs this year.
So no faith in Kadarius Toney, huh? Just to get mentioned at all.
I like Kadarius. I do. I think he's an explosive player. I just have a hard time when I'm doing these prediction type of things, like assuming or trying to believe that he's going to always make it through the game. And so with that in mind, I feel like I do that old cliche. The availability is always important, right? Your best ability thing, and not that I don't think Kadarius is a complete asset to the team. He's great when he can stay on the field. He's outstanding. Rare bad game. You know, Andy Reid has said countless times already that Kadarius just doesn't drop the football. I believe that. I think it was great of him to face it on both Chris Jones and Kadarius. They were the first among the podium this week. They just were like, let's rip this Band-Aid off. We know that this is going to be tough. And, Kadarius didn't really want to talk about the trade. Saves that for social media. But I don't know. I just have a hard time predicting him to lead in yardage when I just don't know if he's going to make it through a game,
And I thought Brandon Kiley brought up a good point this week when he said, like, Kadarius needs to prove that he's a wide receiver, that he's not just a gadget weapon.
Yeah.
And I think that that's true. That's really true in the way that the Chiefs have utilized him. Like, even in week one, without Travis Kelce, we saw Patrick Mahomes try to go to him in really big spots of the game. And obviously he just couldn't put it together that week. But we've seen him do that last season when he came over to the Chiefs and they deployed him. They were deploying him on a very minimal amount of snaps, but when they were putting him in the game, they were utilizing him in a lot of different ways. And they're the ones that were hyping him up as, we believe he can be our wide receiver one. And right now, he's proven that he's an explosive athlete and that he can be a guy that you use in lots of different and creative ways. But he's kind of playing more into that McCole Hardman role right now than he is like that number one wide receiver Tyreek Hill kind of role for the Chiefs. And he still has to prove that.
When you miss all of training camp due to injury, I think the Chiefs were game planning in other fashions and that goes back to the injury thing. And I don't ever want to call an injury player an injury prone, especially when they're in their third year. It could just be unlucky at that point. But until he plays a full season and can show the Chiefs, hey, I can play 16, 17 games here. I just think the Chiefs have to have other game plans in mind. And so you end up having a package for Tony rather than making him a focal point of the offense because, like, again, you don't know necessarily if he is going to be able to last. And I just don't think you build a complete offensive game plan around him. However, someone who has been rather durable has been Travis Kelce. And so the second I think you inject him to the lineup, everything we're talking about among these wide receivers, everything gets easier, kind of like Chris Jones on the other side that I was talking with Steve Spagnuolo about. Everything gets easier when Travis Kelce is in the lineup because it just takes so much attention away, and you're gifted the one-on-ones and that speed, that break, that Kadarius Toney, that elite ability to stop and kind of change directions and break away from a player. Now it's one-on-one instead of maybe getting additional attention. Same thing with Sky Moore and go on and on with the offensive weapons of the Chiefs. So the sooner Travis Kelce can get back in this lineup, I know that all of the players on the offensive side of the football are looking forward to that.
So one question before we get out of here from Joshua Dooley, and you guys relied on the questions today, so you must be pretty confident in this matchup against the Jags on Sunday. But why is everyone ignoring MVS? I think it's because we know exactly who MVS is, and he had that huge catch for Patrick Mahomes last week against the Lions, and I think MVS is kind of just your stable veteran wide receiver. You know what he can do. You know he can make some big time catches in some big moments of the game, but that's kind of who he's always been his entire career. He's not somebody who's going to come out here and have 1,400 receiving yards or something like that. He's far along enough in his NFL career that we know exactly who he is, and we don't expect some kind of like drastic improvement year over year from him.
Yeah, he's been in the league for a long time. I think we did chat last year when he first came to the Chiefs about him being a more complete receiver than he was in Green Bay, where you look at the way that the year was, it was kind of what he did in Green Bay when it came to stretching the field. Occasionally he would pop with a big catch. There were some games where the Chiefs really, really needed him to step up and in big time games, thinking about the AFC title game, and he was able to do that. But I think I'll piggyback on your point, Steve. I just don't think he's going to be a week-to-week yardage leader because, circumstances seem to have to go his way for him to pile up that yardage. It's the difference between a Kelce and an MVS. Kelce, if he's up, 9 times out of 10, Patrick Mahomes is going to be looking at him most of the game, if not every single play first. I just don't know if Marquez is ever going to be that guy. We're not ignoring him. I think he's an important part of this team, but more so in the role player fashion than anyone that's going to be a go-to guy, so to speak.
Yeah, I totally agree. And he's Pete Sweeney. Follow him on Twitter at PG Sweeney. I'm Stephen Serda. That's where you can find me. Make sure you're locked into arrowheadpride.com. We got everything you need to know about this matchup on Sunday against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Make sure you're locked into the Arrowhead Pride Podcast Network as well. Got a fresh episode of Kingdom Keys coming your way Saturday to pregame this thing before we get to Sundays. One of only 2 noon kickoffs for the Kansas City Chiefs. We are very excited about that here at Arrowhead Pride. We will take a noon kickoff where we can get one. As always, please make sure you subscribe, rate, and review everything that we are doing here on the Arrowhead Pride Podcast Network. If you want to submit questions for the Friday live stream, you can also do that in the reviews, and we'll get to them every Friday around 9 a.m. right here on all of the Arrowhead Pride channels. But we got a big game on Sunday between the Chiefs and Jags. We will talk to you guys then.